was struck by one of those game design dilemma questions recently, like in the very first Semi-Ramblo, where I was talking about if a game should get easier or harder as you go through it. And this is another difficulty-related question, actually. Answer me this, fellow scholars. In games that have side content alongside the critical path, should the most difficult challenge in the game be the final boss, or an optional boss? Some games take the obvious route and have the final boss be the most difficult challenge in the game. There's too many games to list that do that. 9 Souls was the first one to leap to my mind, probably because I stopped playing at the final boss and watched the ending on YouTube because I couldn't be asked. But another school of thought says that the ending to the story should always be accessible to any level of player, while the hardest challenge should be an opt-in choice for only the most hardcore and invested of users, keen to prove their mettle. So you have things like the Pit of 100 Trials in Paper Mario 2, or Galamoth in Symphony of the Night. I know From Software's attitude is to save the hardest bosses for the DLC, which I guess puts them in the optional camp. There's an understanding that if you buy a DLC that you're thoroughly invested in the gameplay loop and keen to show off your mastery. But if the optional boss is harder than the final boss, how does that make sense in context? Why wasn't Lord Gwyn being protected by Knight Artorias, the much harder boss fight? Come to that, why didn't Knight Artorias just kill Lord Gwyn and take that motherfucker over? Actually, that's a bad example. I'm pretty sure most of the boss fights in Dark Souls could take Lord Gwyn. But the real question hanging over this matter for me is, if beating the hardest challenge isn't the very last thing you do in your time with the game, then what the fuck are you gonna do after that? Victory laps? Saunter over to the real final boss wearing your crown that's bigger than his and laughingly give him a wedgie? Related question, what do you reward the player with for beating the optional most difficult challenge in the game? Traditionally, you reward the player with some kind of gameplay boon that increases their power or something, but if there are no harder challenges left, what's the point? They've just proved they don't need it. I guess you could reward them with a silly hat with no purpose except bragging rights, but there's not going to be much chance to enjoy the spectacle of yourself wearing the silly hat, because you're probably about done playing the game now. It seems to me the answer to my question comes down to when the player should consider themselves done with the game, and that depends on the player. Some only consider themselves done when they've 100%ed everything and mastered every challenge, including any super hard optional ones, but some, like myself, want to be done when the story's done. I'm a narrative guy. I want to end on a high note, and when completing the story is made too easy so that everyone gets a participation award, and the real challenges can be saved for what I fondly refer to as post-ending fuckabouts mode, I feel disappointed. Borderlands 4 did that to me. I was struck by how easy the final boss fights were. It felt like the story was something the game was trying to hastily get over with, so we could move on to the part where I pointlessly grind up numbers forever. An attitude we should probably just call Monster Hunter syndrome, but as a story hound, I find it impossible to feel invested in the challenges if it's not in aid of a final goal. And if the final boss isn't the culmination of everything we've been preparing for, then what on earth was the point? I appreciate this is a me problem, and kind of rooted in the overly rigid attitude that games can only ever be linear sequences of challenges strung together by plot, but really I'm talking about this so I can talk about something else, and that's the whole question of what the word optional even means when it comes to video games. It's become a bugbear of mine. Surely the answer's obvious, Yards, I hear you cry. It just means whatever you don't need to do to finish the story. But what is the story? And what constitutes finishing it? Let me throw a couple of case studies at you. First of all, Batman Arkham Knight, an open-world game with a relatively straight case of main story campaign and ton of side content. You beat the main story and defeat Scarecrow, and of course Batman plops straight back into the sandbox to finish off everything else. But here's the rub. That's not the end of the story. The actual story ending with closure only happens after you've done all the side content as well, and brought in all the supervillains, meaning all of those repetitive militia bases and fucking Batmobile challenges, and lest we forget every single fucking Riddler trophy, including all the ones the Riddler really phoned in, like he just stuck them in a girl's bathroom or something. And this rubbed people up the wrong way, because by the definition of quote optional content being stuff you don't need to do to finish the story, all of this tedious side content of interest only to fully invested completionists is magically rendered non-optional by the addition of a second story ending. And so all the story hunters who might feel they could at least skip bringing the Riddler in, because he's not going to be much trouble trapped underneath a floor strapped to an industrial washing machine, have to get dragged through it all as well. I don't think people would have complained as much if the game had simply cut out the second story ending and let post-ending fuckabouts be post-ending fuckabouts, like it was in Arkham City. Second case study, a more recent one, Silent Hill F. In Silent Hill F, you play through a linear story and then the story ends, but the ending is terrible and provides no closure for the journey up to that point. And it turns out that this is only the mandatory ending for the first playthrough, and in subsequent playthroughs you can fulfill certain criteria to get different endings. And even then, the only way to get the one ending with closure that resolves the plot is on the third or fourth playthrough. So my question is, which of these endings is the one that officially marks the end of non-optional content? If the first, we're stuck with a shit ending. If the last, we are apparently obliged to play through the entire game 3 times. And I don't want to do that. I'd get bored. So you can see there are flaws and blurred lines in the accepted definitions of optional versus critical path. I'd like to propose, games industry, that we cut the word optional from our vocabularies, at least where game design is concerned. Because here's the thing. Hard as this might be to believe, if you spend any time in the communities for games like Dota 2 or EVE Online, video games are still a thing that we, broadly speaking, do for fun. In other words, playing a video game at all is optional, and what is and is not going to be engaged with can only be decided by the individual player. There's a tendency for devs and supporters to use the word optional as a crutch. Oh, it doesn't matter that the difficulty of this specific challenge is balanced for shit, it's optional. Oh, you've no right to complain that this side quest is boring, grindy and repetitive because it's optional. Well, I don't accept that. Just eat around the parts you don't like doesn't hold sway with me, because the fact of those parts' existence excludes the existence of something else. You could have had something fun instead, or cut it entirely and spent the effort involved on making the rest of the game better. Going forward, can we all make the assumption that if something is in a game, it was put there with the overt expectation on the creator's part that the player would engage with it? Feels weird that that needs to be said, actually. You don't get to put a bucket of sick on the buffet table and then call me the asshole for complaining that the avocado dip tastes weird.
A riddle for you. What is both a standalone game and an expansion playable with all previous versions of that game? Fools! It's the Red Dragon in 10! That's right, Slugfest Games presents The Red Dragon in 10, a new standalone expansion to the Red Dragon Inn, now on Kickstarter. Like each previous version, 10 is a card game all about a group of dungeon crawlers heading to the tavern to see who's left standing at the end of the night.
So I says to the goblin, I says, show me your component pouch first.
Version 10 can be played all by itself with up to 6 players, or you could mix and match characters from any Red Dragon Inn game or expansion. This edition will have 6 new characters, including Dominique the Resourceful and Trapmaster Alaric, along with new drinks and prizes. It is a fully stretched Kickstarter campaign, so plenty of characters and content will be revealed throughout, including content that won't be in the retail version of the game.
Just like how I won't be sharing my health potions. Deal with it, sucker.
To see all the details and get your hands on a copy, head on over to slugfestgames.com/getrdi10 and check out the Red Dragon in 10 today.
Now I wonder what that verbal spell component does. slugfestgames.com/getrdi10. Oh no! It's making me have fun with my friends! Ah!